Good evening. I'd like to talk to you about my cancer journey. I was in a tiny cubicle in the Royal Hallamshire Hospital, and facing me was this total stranger, a doctor I'd never met before, telling me that I had IBC. IBC? I'd never heard of it. Have you? Well, I soon learned that IBC was a rare and very aggressive form of cancer. And yes, it was caught late, because a GP that I'd visited some months earlier had assured me that I didn't have cancer, and all my symptoms were the menopause. Well, being a poet, I wrote about it. And this haiku expresses my bewilderment. IBC haiku. I caught IBC as easy as ABC, but don't know from where. Well, at the time of my cancer diagnosis, I had just managed to get permission to bring my mother, Tara, over from India to live with us. She was a widow, and I was her only family. She had lost her younger sister to cancer some time back. So it was a very stressful time for me, but also for my family. And I had just been feeling so relieved, thinking that at last I have my mother here, my husband here, both in the same country, under one roof, so I can look after them and don't have this constant stress of flying back and forth between India and Sheffield, depending on who is ill at what time. And now, of course, they were looking after me. I have to say, I've always been interested in the way that writing and all the expressive arts are linked somehow with mental illness. There's a large grain of truth, I think, in what Robert Burton said about all poets being mad. And for many years, I have been actively involved in national charities like Survivors Poetry, of which I'm a patron, and Poems for the Waiting Room, which I co-chair. And with these charities, I've been involved, among other things, in mentoring poets, fellow poets, undergoing difficult and distressing times. And now, here I was, going through a very difficult time. And I could see that there was no support group locally. So I determined that if I ever got through this experience and came out the other side, as it were, I would start a support group for cancer survivors and carers, because I could see the enormous toll that it also took on the people who are caring for me, my family and my friends. Well, the cancer journey was a very difficult one. There were harsh times, but in those days, there were also a few very good moments that stand out in my memory. And I'd like to share just two of those outstanding positive memories. One was in 2012, the year I had my second cancer diagnosis. But that was also the year when I was nominated in the Arts and Culture category to be an Olympic torchbearer for Sheffield. I was the last Olympic torchbearer for Sheffield, and so I had the honor of carrying the Olympic torch from Sheffield to Rotherham. And it was such a thrilling day for me. On either side, I could see on the pavements my family, my friends, and so many people whom I didn't know. But what I did know was they were fellow Sheffielders. And I've always been really proud of my adopted city, but I think never more proud than that day. And you know, the way that the crowd was rooting for me, it just lifted me up. And cancer or no cancer, I was running. And I felt that I could have run forever. The other very happy memory for me was the time in the middle of a long series of really grueling chemotherapy sessions, when I was at a very low ebb indeed. And I got the news that the Queen and Prince Philip were inviting me to Buckingham Palace to award me with an MBE for services to literature. I've had many literary prizes in my time, but this was very special because it felt like a recognition from the country, from my adopted country. At the time, I couldn't accede to the invitation straight away because I was just too ill. But probably about 6 months or so later, as soon as the doctors gave me permission to travel anywhere at all, I went to Buckingham Palace. I was bald at the time, and I remember my stepdaughter, who was also going through cancer at the time, she said, "Debjani, you must wear a wig. Let me get a wig for you." And I said, "No, I just want to be natural." So I went as I was, but in a sari. And at Buckingham Palace, we were told that the men must all bow. Prince Charles was going to pin the MBE on my sari, and the ladies should curtsy. And I didn't want to curtsy. I'd never curtsied in my life. And I thought, well, never mind. I'm a British Indian poet after all. So when my name was announced, I went up smartly and stood in front of Prince Charles, and I gave him the Indian greeting, Namaskar. And it means my soul bows to the soul in you. And of course, I knew that Prince Charles, being a very cosmopolitan gentleman who's visited India many times, and I remember that famous visit to the Taj Mahal with Princess Diane, so I knew he would know about it. But he was a little taken aback. But then we had a long conversation while everyone had to just stand still. Well, what we talked about was literature, we talked about health. I also asked him some personal questions. And at the end of it, Prince Charles did a namaskar to me. So those were good times. The bad times, yes, there were a lot of bad times. Medical blunders, of course, can happen to anyone at any time, and probably even in the best hospitals. And I'm afraid I had perhaps more than my share of some medical blunders, particularly at one particular hospital, Northern General. And I'm not going to go through all those episodes, but I will tell you about one that was especially traumatic. I was at the Northern General Hospital to have a tube fitted in my chest. It's called the Hickman line. And the radiologist said this is a very minor operation that only takes 20 minutes, and there's no doctor needed, no surgeon needed, no anesthetist needed. We'll just do it with injections. So she was there with a nurse. But things did go wrong, and she didn't get the right spot. So an artery was punctured, and I saw my blood spurting out like a fountain. And of course I was in a panic, but so were the two medical people. And the nurse immediately grabbed hold of a pillow and pushed it onto my face. And I was struggling. And the radiologist sat on my chest. And I thought, I don't really understand what's going on, but these two people, whom I don't know, for some strange reason, are trying to kill me. And, well, all I can say is, instead of what should have been a 20-minute operation, it was 2 hours. Eventually, when I came out, my husband Brian tells me that I was looking, if you can imagine, with my brown skin, that I was looking as white as a sheet, he says, but a sheet covered in blood. And for quite a long time, I could not speak. And for an even longer time, I have to say, for several years, I could not even pronounce the name of that hospital without having major panic attacks. So it was very traumatic. But the thing is that I believe writing is life-affirming. And so as soon as my side effects started becoming a bit more manageable, and the neuropathy in my fingers, for instance, started receding a little bit, and I was able to write again, I decided I will write. So even if I could not verbalize that awful experience at the Northern General, I could write about it. And, you know, it's a dangerous thing to mess with writers, because we can take revenge. And I wrote a number of revenge poems, and I'm going to give you a sample. I call this revenge poem, What I Did Today. Today, I blew up the Northern General again, bulldozed the waiting room in hell where I had sat all morning in a silly gown. I strangled the arrogant GP who knew so little but pretended to know it all. My itching hands throttled the oncologists, the indifferent one who swaned off on holiday, forgetful of referring me for a Hickman line under anesthesia in a half-decent hospital, and the one who lost my consent form and thrust me into a nightmare place of endless screams. I fought the boffin butcher who drilled holes in me. And finally, I exterminated every homicidal sidekick masquerading as an angel of mercy. All these things and more I did today. I did eventually get an apology after a long time of writing letters of complaint, having one-to-one meetings with them. Yes, I had an apology. But I have to admit, I still get a kick out of reciting that and other revenge poems against that particular hospital. And as I slowly recovered from my cancer, I did set up something I call the Healing Word. This is a support group that uses reading, writing, storytelling, basically all the kind of verbal and written words. And this support group is free to cancer survivors and carers. And the wonderful Dave Kirby, whom you've already met, is one of my regulars, and you will be meeting another, an equally wonderful person called Marge Allen. One of the things that for me is the most beneficial thing about setting up the Healing Word is the sense of camaraderie that it gives us. And here I certainly found my support and friendship. So I'm going to finish really with a poem in which I express that sense of solidarity and fellow feeling. And it's in 4 haiku. Rafts of Hope. Cancer-free moments shine in my life's calendar. I'm a survivor. These moments are rafts on turbulent seas, each one I name survival. I pass other rafts with hands outstretched, each one held tight, for each is mine. Being survivors, we are in this together, one large family. Thank you and namaskar. Was it more than 10 minutes?